we've got now ahead of us 7 episodes of Loving Unconditionally, and broadly speaking, they're based on your book Unconditional Love, An Unlimited Way of Being. And what I'd like to do is I know this first episode we're going to be talking about unconditional love, what it is, and so on, how we can understand what unconditional love is, and how we can express it in our lives. And there's a paragraph at the top of the first chapter, which you've actually written in italics. So this is your introductory paragraph, and I'd like to read it. There's a silent revolution going on within a seeming chaos of changes on Earth. One by one, people around the world are awakening to an energy and power that is transforming the course of all humanity. An inner impulse is driving us forward and asking us to evolve beyond our current reality. This silent force promises to change forever the way we live on this planet. We, as a race of people, are becoming consciously aware of unconditional love. Now, I mean, usually you talk about unconditional love in a very universal context, and also timeless, so that it can apply to all people at all times. And I dare say it's always possible to say that there are lots of changes going on in the world, and that we are always learning. But perhaps I could ask you now to take this over and say how you feel this is particularly relevant today.
Sure. I mean, from my personal experience, my own inner awakening, my own point of reference where I started to notice that I was focused almost solely upon the outer world. And yet there was this inner nudge that I've mentioned in previous conversations, where something started to tug within me, something started to catch my attention within me, something started to say that there was more. And it was a series of probably many uneventful events, experiences that I was having, but there's something that was beginning to say, I'm doing everything right in the outer, so I think, so I believe. I'm following the script, the cultural determinations, the suggestions, and yet I started to notice that I wasn't quite happy within. I wasn't really, satisfied, or certainly, moments of joy were swamped by lots of worry, fear, shame, doubt, and I just started to notice that there had to be something more going on. And it was that initial inner shift that caused me to start to pay attention more about me in relationship to the world, and exactly, who am I, what am I doing, and where am I going with my life, were some of those probably very broad-based fundamental initial questions. Mm-hmm. I can say now, fast forwarding a couple of decades later, that this, of course, can happen with anyone at any stage of life, in any circumstance, in any time, in any age. There's really a point of which we kind of do have that inner nudge, and I'm sure now it's very clear to me that inner nudge is kind of always there. It tends to get a little bit louder at certain stages in our life, and then it tends to, be kind of overwhelmed by outer activities and kind of ignored. And we could even call it the little silent voice within, that little part of us that says, you're so focused on the outer, come within. And sometimes it's a circumstance and a health issue, a relationship issue, perhaps a financial or survival issue that can trigger these. And I do recognize now that they can really happen at any stage in our personal evolution, and of course they can also happen at any stage of our overall collective evolution on the planet. Because I have started to go within over all these years and really begun to understand myself in relationship to everything around me, I have also found that, yes, there is also a collective evolution going on, and there are great changes happening externally, in the outer world. No matter what culture we're in, no matter where we are on the planet, there is exponential change going on. So could we say, 100 years ago, we could probably say the same thing, that this change was going on because it was very rapid. We could perhaps go back, to other time periods and in reference point can say, well, yes, there's change, partially because change is the constant. Everything is constantly changing.
Sure.
My understanding through all of this exploration, and of course I keep, exploring more and expanding more and finding out more of what I don't know, which is really quite fascinating because that gives me more to find out about life, the universe, and everything, is that the one constant that doesn't change in its core essence is love. So love is the part that is always within us, and it is why I've dedicated the last 20 plus years of my life to exploring love for myself and then sharing what I find is universal understandings in simple, practical ways, because I really find that the love piece, when understood and when we come from love, then change itself is embraced and accepted for what it naturally is. We actually start to flow with change and actually become a catalyst with change and an agent of change. But this time we're actually doing it from a very conscious standpoint and a very loving standpoint and a very holistic standpoint. So there is a silent revolution going on within us. We can see evidence of it in just the past century alone, the past 100 years, going from horse and buggy to, spaceships that are going beyond our own galaxy. I mean, there has been no time period that we're aware of that has had this type of accelerated change. And I can say even in the past, 2 years, that acceleration has been exponential compared to the previous, 5 years or 10 years. I can also imagine, though, again, if I go back 100 years, that degree of change was probably also felt exponentially just within the mindset of that time period. So, it really doesn't matter where we pick up, because this is really talking about consciousness. This is really talking about connecting with love. And the more we understand who we are, this timeless understanding will benefit our overall consciousness and our overall awareness of life, no matter where we are. The idea of focusing on love, for me, is the part that actually perhaps even becomes the very seed notion of creating more of exponential awareness. It is the piece that actually drives us to want to know more, because the more we release limitation, doubt, and fear, the more we realize there really is to life, the interconnectedness. We start to understand the atomic structure all the way out to the intergalactic structure and how all these things work together constantly. Life becomes much more fascinating. Of course, it also moves much more rapidly because there's a significant increase in the amount of information and understanding that we have compared to when we are solely focused on a particular aspect of life and really see nothing else in relationship to it. So in this video, in this particular episode, what we want to explore is more of the understanding of love as a way to understand who we are in relationship to life, as a way to really understand the mechanics, as it would be, of how our life actually operates when we become more consciously aware of who we are. And this certainly, again, I come back to my own experiences, that when I was living, in the scripts, in the cultural icons, and the suggestions, and living based on all the things that I had been taught and the way everyone else was living and trying to fit into that structure, I simply did not know that there was so much more to me. There was no teaching, understanding. There was nothing that brought together all this new relative information that actually helped me be more me. And I ended up choosing to, make this exploration and then bring out, the pieces that I was understanding as a way to share it, so that others who can come into their own awakening will have material that they can actually, explore for themselves, because it is ultimately a unique adventure. It is individual. We're surrounded constantly with people and information, yet it is up to us to choose to be more conscious in the direction that we go. It's up to us to explore ourselves, explore the world around us, and really open up to the more unlimited potentials that really exist, coexist, simultaneously exist synchronistically exist. Things that we tap into on occasion can actually be a more natural part of our everyday life. Magic and miracles are really just the working out of universal law when understood. But I certainly didn't understand any of this initially. It wasn't until I started to explore it and look for and find and be brought to a wealth of information that I started to really understand how much more there is to each of us, and how brilliant and how creative and how magnificent we all are, and how much potential we have. Is unfathomable how much potential we have. And yet if we only see life through limitation, through the filter of shame or the filter of guilt, or if we doubt our abilities, we doubt our potential, then of course we create limited realities. And certainly over this series we will explore how that comes to be and how we can make changes in that. But in this particular one, what we really want to dive into is the actual understanding of unconditional love, who we are and how we can actually open up our heart and expand more of our understanding about love itself as the groundwork. In other words, for me, and certainly people can come up from different angles, but for me it has worked really well to make love the beginning point of everything I do and everything I contemplate and everything I act upon, because then I bring love into all of my creation. So for me, the beginning point is to start with love and then move back out into the world with that understanding of love.
So obviously here you're talking about going within, looking within for that love, and you just mentioned about opening the heart. So where is the love within? I mean, in what sense is it within? In what sense is it innate and a fundamental part of us?
Well, I think to understand it first, we have to kind of understand how we have been looking for love outside of ourselves. In other words, we look to love, we look for love. This is the fundamental piece that seemingly connects all of us in our human understanding, is that we are all looking for love. We're all looking for a sense of validation, a sense of connection, a sense of being a part of. We are looking in our jobs and our careers, our relationships, our activities, in our nations, in our environment. We're always looking for the experience of love. And it's a strange irony in a way that while we've been looking so strongly externally, the place that it actually resides is within us. It actually begins within us, and we actually flow it out, and then we experience it because we're flowing it out. Certainly we have, as a race of people on this planet, looked everywhere for it. We've covered every corner of the earth looking for love. It's sung in ballads, thousands of years ago. It's sung in the idea of relationships. It's done in poetry. It's done in, ancient texts and teachings. Certain identifiable masters have come along and talked about love. And yet we've gone out continuously looking externally, trying to find that love, because we've seen glimpses of it in, our outer experience. All we have to do is turn within. All we have to do is go within and begin to recognize that right in the very center of our being, we often call it the heart, but really in the center of our being, which is a conscious place for us that is not necessarily in the head and is not necessarily even identified, in locale in the heart, but we will metaphorically call it the heart center of our being. That's where we can tap into, in fact, do find the very animating principle, the very spark of life that is who we are, the very piece of us that, causes our body to operate and allows us to move about this world. There's an intelligence, a wisdom, a universal source of love that is there whenever we choose to tap into it. And of course, for me, the idea is to not only tap into it, but become a natural stream of that same love. Interestingly enough, when we do make that shift and turn within, we do find that that love is there. We also have a tendency to almost immediately resist it. It's again another one of the strange phenomena in our living, is that tapping into the love and realizing that it's within, we also realize spontaneously just how much potential and power we actually have. And I think for all the search in the outer for something that is a semblance of it, to actually realize that it's already within, it kind of changes the game. And in fact, we stop searching. We find that which we've been looking for, and it makes for a very different type of way of living. And for those that have been living, in a certain way for a very long time, even if, say, the doubts and the fears and the activities that we engage in are problematic, challenging, you know, difficult in most days, people will still tend to hang on to that because it's secure and known. People are, as much as they seek love, they're less willing in many instances to actually embrace more of this unknown area, to actually explore more of who they are and find out more of who they are, because there seems to be initially that safety and security in the way it's always been done. So they would actually rather suffer under the weight of their own miscreation than to explore and correct and enhance and change and transcend these limiting beliefs and actually begin to live more universally, giving them, of course, everything that they're looking for. And yet making that initial step, especially if you have no outer confirmation or reflections, you know, it can initially be quite an interesting and perhaps lonely and shall I even say somewhat terrifying journey, because at that point we're actually beginning to pay attention to who we are, and that isn't necessarily how cultures work. You know, we have set it up to find security in establishments and institutions. We found security in and safety seemingly in giving our power away to things outside of ourselves, with a cost, of course. The cost living in fear and doubt and shame and guilt, worry and anger and frustration and hatred and blaming and all these types of things. That's a heavy cost in order to have what appears to be a semblance of momentary security and safety. Again, that a bit of a conundrum we've got ourselves in, because in that particular approach to life, we are giving our power away. We are letting ourselves be somewhat controlled by outer circumstances and missing literally our personal power, which perpetuates the old cycles. And these limitations get passed down generation after generation, perpetuated, when what we're looking for is that natural freedom. And we are not willing to give ourselves that very same freedom. So it has to begin within. And that's probably the most significant understanding that I came across quickly on, that it has to begin within. If I want to see a different world, I have to think and feel a different world. I have to think and feel differently about myself, and I have to think and feel and imagine differently for my future, or what I choose to do next. And all that happens from within. And if we're taking our limitations, and that's what we're contemplating, we're contemplating yesterday, we're going to create more of yesterday. It takes a certain strength and courage to begin to focus on life in the future and actually focus on potential. And in this case, future, you know, we're speaking somewhat of a linear time frame reference, that we're saying, like, you know, what do we want to become rather than who were we? And that's a very dramatic shift in the direction in our life, given the way we've been looking at life.
So you feel that we can have complete confidence that we have this love within us, and that if we bring it out of ourselves, it has the power to transform our lives, and perhaps even help us unfold all the potential we have. And we just never realized that it's there, and that's the way to do it.
That's certainly been my experience. You know, prior to these inner awakenings and these inner explorations, these understandings of who I am, you know, in the broader and ever broadening sense, I beat to a certain drum originally, and I did things according to the way I was brought up. I mean, we come into this world, in the moment we're here, we're filled with potential. And we command that attention, you know, with all those around us as little babies. At the same time, as babies, we look to all those around us, you know, family, friends, teachers, you know, guides, to give us some indication of how to work and live in this world. But as I just mentioned, you know, if you just simply at that stage begin to already understand that limitations, limiting beliefs have been perpetuated through generations, the individuals who are really here to theoretically help us uncover our potential are they themselves filled with a lot of limitation, a lot of old scripts and ways of looking at life, and so they are not going to be able to pass along an encouragement to fulfill this potential. So over our childhood and even into our early adulthood, we have this experience where we keep, with intense curiosity, which is what children really have, they want to know everything about everything. The frame of reference, the information that is reflected back is oftentimes very colored and very limited in its potential and wisdom that it could be. So we're taking on lots of suggestions. We're not only by verbal or by text, we're not just picking up on information based on how people have presented it to us, but we're also picking up on tremendous amounts of subtle cues. Our parents might actually be very confirming and affirming who we are and say that we've filled with potential, but we witness them fighting with each other constantly. And so we pick up on this, well, they're saying that life is great and life is, filled with potential, and yet they're not living it. So we put all that in our consciousness, and we build this momentum of a lot of conflicting understandings, a lot of conflicting beliefs, traditions that don't meet their ideal, rituals that don't speak to us. And yet we follow them because we're expected to, or we think we're expected to follow them. What would happen if we actually simply woke up to the understanding, or stopped for a moment and said, wait a minute, what do I think? Do I really still believe this? And of course, I'm talking about perhaps, at a later age than childhood, where we begin to actually notice that we have a lot of conflicting beliefs. And we start to question those beliefs, and we start to ask ourselves, what do I believe? How do I see this? Thank you all for all the information that has been presented and all the beliefs and traditions. Simply stop and say, how do I see life? Do I see life and view it from a standpoint of fear, or do I choose to view life from a standpoint of love? That's something each of us, every single person on this planet, has the ability to do. That is a choice, a very fundamental choice that we all have. We do not have to continue to follow scripts and suggestions and limitations. We can actually stop and make a choice, and we can say, I choose to no longer live life through fear. I'm going to understand what fear is truly, and what it really means. I'm also going to choose to understand what love means, because certainly what happens is when we find the love is that universal peace that is in all of us. That is something we can cultivate, where, for example, fear is quite fleeting. Fear doesn't have any energy of its own other than what we give it. So for me, the love piece is that idea of an aspect of energy that we can tune into and flow and expand, that does serve not only ourselves and expands the love in our heart and expands the love for ourselves, but it then does flow out into the world, and it allows us to be interactive with the world in a completely different way. And of course, people are only going to know this by their own personal experience. I mean, there is no 7 steps to. Everyone will come at this in their own way. The idea is to bring love into our consciousness, and the intention to expand love itself, understanding it, understanding what it is, how it is, and how it relates to us. And then once we have a deeper understanding, to begin to actually use love in all that we do.
And we're talking here about unconditional love, aren't we? It's not an exclusive love for one's spouse or family or something in particular. This is an unconditional love for everyone, isn't it? So that unconditional love is a fundamental part of our being. I mean, you said universal peace, and I'm just wondering whether as our being, this is not an emotional energy. This is a state of being, and perhaps is in some ways devoid of actual feeling or experience, except that perhaps it's one of peace and one of well-being, perhaps at that level. Is that how it could be experienced?
Sure, and here again, it probably benefits us to first look at how we use love in the outer world, and the way most people take just the simple singular word of love, because we use it, and we've literally watered down in many ways any meaning, because we are using it to describe, perhaps our love of our career, our love of our house, and we're using it as a descriptive term, that simply just has no real relevance. Like love, there's a sense like we just throw it around without actually, feeling the essence of the very love word that we're using. For others, it's actually comes down to the only love that they actually think they have in life is perhaps the sexual physiological release in a moment with a partner. And to them, that love making is the only time that they are connecting to any sense of love. The rest of their life, they don't really have any relationship to, because in many ways, we are so hypnotized by the outer structures, by the outer traditions and cultural suggestions, that we really don't have but the odd random thought of our own that is uniquely our own. So we go around in life and we look for that bit of love, and we seem to think that in that physical or physiological connection we have an experience that somehow resembles a sense of love. So there's certainly, a physical component. There's the mental component. There's also the emotional component, as you've mentioned, the part where we oftentimes, certainly I'm sure, mothers will have that time where they feel that unconditional love, fathers too, but, mothers in particular are known for having that unconditional love for their child. And yet they will still walk with all the other doubts and fears and belief systems that really are quite conditioned and quite conditional. And even though that core essence, that core link to the child is certainly of a link of unconditional love, the interactions, the upbringing, the time periods where we're around, for example, our children, can be extraordinarily conditional, because we're still striving to work out our life through them and our expectations through them. And so, the unconditional love that we espouse, that we say we have, isn't always that unconditional. For others, there's the using of the idea of love as a way to gain favor. We will tell somebody I love them, either because we think we have to, we should, it's tradition, it's obligation, but in fact, we don't really mean it. We just are simply using it because it's, again, a phrase that is used within our cultural structure. So what we find is we're using love, to describe something, to try to connect with, an emotional understanding. We might even try to gain favor, say, well, if I say I love you, then you'll give me something in return. I mean, there's lots and lots of misguided intentions and agendas that, when rightly understood, we're really not speaking of love. We're really externalizing and, still more or less playing out a variety of games to kind of extract what we're seeking. Again, we've said all along, we have been seeking in the outer. We are going through this silent revolution because it is an inner thing. We are beginning to realize that the love is within us. So as we begin to realize that, okay, this love, this part that is, can be found in the emotional aspect, can be found in our thought process, it can be found in the physiological connection, it can be found in all these things, and yet rightly understood, behind all of these things or within all of these things is even more love. Like the very essence of love is in all of these, but they're just being kind of enshrouded and encapsulated in these identifiable physical moments, physical experiences. But when we look at love itself, it really is much more than all that. It's the very essence, like I said, the animating principle that actually animates our body, that allows us to move around, that takes care of all these physiological things within our body to even allow us to function. There's a grand wisdom in that. There's an interconnection when we look up at the stars and we know that there's a connection going on beyond fathomable reaches of our mind. As we look out into the stars, well, we can also look out in nature, and we see nature working in such precious harmony, in such beauty, in such, constant change and interaction, cycling, recycling, and yet always sustaining itself in absolute beauty and perfection in its own right. Those are the moments when we start to realize that there's love presence. We can look at a sunset and we go beyond our thoughts and our, mind and our even physical, and we really merge in a way with that connection to all that is. That's getting us closer to love as a way of being. It literally is that beingness. When we are in love, when we're truly in love, in those moments, those brief moments that perhaps we glimpse it, and we're really in that, we know we've touched something transcendent. We know we have come in connection with something that is universal and connects us to everything else. Throw in the word unconditional, and this is where my work has taken off and expanded this, where we use love and we use it as a word in so many different ways. The moment we add unconditional, I've seen this very fascinating shift in awareness that when we bring in unconditional, we're talking about something being without condition. We're talking about something being without limit. To be without limit, and throw that with this understanding that love is a way of being, then unconditional love is an unlimited way of being, gives us a more practical definition. Now, it may not tell us exactly what it is, but then how do we actually contain or define or limit the experience of love when it is and permeates universally through everything? Why would we want to limit it? So a way of being does give us a descriptive understanding, and an unlimited way of being gives us the opportunity to recognize that love is simply being present in the moment and being unlimited with all of our thoughts, all of our feelings, with all of our experiences, being fully and unconditionally accepting of ourselves and being fully and unconditionally accepting of the reality around us. When we are in those states of grace, that's when new insight, new awareness, expansion of potentials comes in even more, because now we're looking at everything essentially, shall we say, energetically as a clean slate. We're not attaching ourselves to any particular limitation. Therefore, we can see that a tree is more than a tree. We can see that the relationship we're having with a clerk at a line in a store is so much more than the limitations we place on the definitions of the experience that we're having. We start to connect and we start to become quite multidimensional. We start to become quite interconnected with things. And now we have what I would consider or would share as a more right relationship. Now we're getting closer to a real truth of being, of who we are in relationship to the world. And again, our mind wants to identify, our mind wants to label, our mind wants to define, our mind wants to put it into a cubbyhole. And what we're going to be exploring is how not to do that, how to live a more unlimited life, live and bring forth more of our potential, and live and bring forth more of our love as a different way to approach life, an expanded way to approach life, a more universal, a more connected, a more rich, a more fascinating, engaging, encouraging, uplifting, enlightening. I mean, there's so many ways to describe how life changes in these exponential ways, in very positive ways, in very uplifting ways, literally, because we do uplift ourselves. We pull ourselves out of the dark quagmire of this seeming chaos, and we find this universal wisdom that is there within the seeming chaos. And when we tune into that, we begin to create brand new and more heartfelt creations that benefit not only ourselves anymore, it benefits all. And that is probably a footnote to all this understanding, is that initially people can say, oh, self-acceptance, total self-acceptance. Pollyanna, you're looking at life and you're saying, oh, it's just all rosy and all wonderful. The one thing that has been ever so clear on this pathway for me is that this choice of taking my attention from the outer and bringing it within comes with the recognition of absolute extraordinary responsibility. Because in fact, when I'm out there in the old way, in the way I had been living, and I followed everything else, and I acted and reacted to everything that was going on, I blamed everyone and everything, and I simply had no relationship to myself, I was still creating. I was creating with the same thoughts and feelings that I'm using today. So was I not responsible for those creations? Oh, I absolutely was responsible for. I simply didn't know it. And so, therefore, I didn't have what we would consider a true soul responsibility, true connection with ourselves. And that's perhaps why we create so many human laws, because we're constantly trying to find responsibility in this outer creation, but it's founded and built upon an outer reality. And it's not connected to that universal piece within us where we actually become, and I've certainly seen this in my life, I become self-correcting. The more consciously aware I am, the more I keep releasing limitation, doubt, and fear, and I keep accepting, embracing, and becoming more responsible for my life through love. And it's a natural, I mean, things that would have taken me perhaps months originally to understand and change my style, my attitude, my perspective, my action. Now that happens in these moments almost simultaneously. I can have a limiting thought. I acknowledge the limiting thought. I can have a fearful or an angry thought. And yet, almost instantaneously, right next to it comes along the compassion, comes the love, comes the gratitude, comes the recognition of that bigger picture. So in my way, I've really taken this whole outer expression, this only looking at life from the outer angle, to an inner angle, to where now I sit in this world and I'm not of it in the same way, because I recognize the interconnection. I recognize the reflection. I see myself in all of these creations, and I know that compassion, gratitude, understanding, wisdom, love, that each moment I can engage this, I actually literally change and shift the world around me, because I'm changing and shifting it within me.
So the starting point is to recognize that love is a completely fundamental part of ourselves. I mean, could you go as far as to say that we're an embodiment of love in the world? I mean, is this how love gets expressed in the world through us? We merge. You say we merge with all there is. Does this then enable us to be part of that great scheme of things that's going on in the world, and we can have great confidence that it knows what it's doing? If we
actually can take it from the very simple circle of life, understanding that which we have within, we give out. That which we give out, we get back. Now, certainly, I didn't recognize that or understand that or even had a clue to that originally. I just simply acted and reacted to things that we're experiencing in the outer world. I certainly had some hopes and dreams, and I followed a fair amount of those hopes and dreams. I never found my personal power in any of that. So I was always subject to the blowing winds. I was always subject to my egoic personality, which was filled with lots of limitation, and I would breed more of that limitation. By having self-doubt, by having my own fears, by having then what would turn into angers and blames, those were the things that I had within. So what did I give out? Very same thing. What did I bring back in my world was a lot of that same reflection. We're seeing that right now in a very grand way on our planet. We're seeing that a lot of people are beginning to notice that their experiences as a collective, it's filled with a lot of hatred, anger, rage, disconnect, self-doubt, fear. There's so much in the outer world that's being expressed because we've kind of accentuated, exponentially sped up these limiting beliefs in ourselves. And of course, what we have within, if we have limited beliefs in ourselves, if we don't really recognize our own personal power, then we're going to express our anger, we're going to express our hatred, we're going to express our bigotry, or our lack of understanding is going to be expressed. And of course, people are going to pick up on that, because what happens is we tend to express anger, we're going to get anger back. Because if we incite anger in someone else from our own anger, we're going to probably find that button in them, and they're going to express anger back. We're actually doing the circle of life in this outer world. When we shifted on the inner plane, when we shifted on our inner world, when we shifted on ourselves, and we start to embrace and accept ourselves, when we start to connect with this love within, we start to share this love with externally, and we start to bring smiles into conversations. We start to talk to people with greater compassion. We start to engage life with greater gratitude. And so what starts to happen is, over time, things will start to come back to us with more of this type of energy. So to answer your question, does that mean we are the embodiment of love? Absolutely. Initially, if it's that little point of light and it's shrouded by layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of generations of doubts and fears and limitations, it's going to be difficult to acknowledge or recognize that, we are actually the embodiment of love. And there's going to be lots and lots and lots of reasons and excuses of why we are not. if we have the perseverance, the tenacity, the desire, the intention, the willingness to go within and keep looking for, expanding, reaching for, acting upon this love, we will, in fact, reveal more of it. We will burn off the dross. We will burn off the limitations. We will let go, release, detach from the things that don't allow us to express this love as a natural state of making love the foundation of our intention in life. Over the course of this particular series, when we do get to the ending video, that's when we will be talking about the fact that we have moved through a lot of this. We have accepted a lot of ourselves, and we are beginning to realize that we are the embodiment of love. In fact, we are more conscious about bringing this love out into the world as part of who we are. So yes, we are the embodiment of love. Do we recognize it at the moment? Probably not. Can we explore it, unfold it, release it, share it, be with it? Absolutely.
Okay. Well, the second chapter of your book is about going within, isn't it? So is this where the process really gets going?
This is where we get down to the nitty gritty. We actually start going and say, okay, what exactly are we doing with our life? How are we creating? And, very fundamental aspects that I say repeatedly, these are not things that I was taught. These were not life skills that I have uncovered and found that are universal, they're timeless, they've been around, but they really are not taught. They're not shared. And yet, when we get to understand the mechanics of how we live in this world, it makes it so much easier to embrace, because now we understand how we can make change, how we can choose differently. So we explore the thoughts and the feelings and some of the ramifications of misguided thoughts and feelings, and then the beauty of living unconditional love as an unlimited way of being, keeping always in mind looking at life from a more unlimited standpoint. So our next one will be going within. So now we understand the love. Now let's go within. Let's start to really explore the essence of how we got here and where can we go with this as a practical application. Because that to me is what we all are most benefited by, is if we have a practical application, something we can actually all do no matter where we are in life, no matter where we are on this planet. We all have the ability to expand our consciousness consciously.
Good. Okay, well, until then, thanks very much.
Pleasure.